Thank you. Yes, I'm Dan Barker. I'm a chief architect for Archer. It's a product around risk management that RSA Security offers. RSA Security is a Dell Technologies company. If anybody here likes running Linux on a desktop, I'm wearing a Sputnik project shirt. So go buy an awesome Ubuntu laptop from Dell. That's the only promotion or mention I'll have for RSA and Dell the rest of the talk. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of my experiences, not just at RSA, but several other companies related to DevOps transformation. In this talk, DevOps transformation is somewhat of a placeholder where any type of large change in a system often requires similar types of steps to be able to enact that change at a larger organization. Smaller organizations require this as well, but maybe to a lesser extent. If there's 20 people in your organization, it's probably a lot easier to make a change than if there's 2,000 or 20,000. So there's a quote here that's, I don't know if it's attributable to anybody, so it could be mine. I never claim any quote that I utter because it's probably from someone else. It's not what we believe, it's what we do that defines our culture. So that means that I'm sure a lot of you see companies that espouse their values and assume that those truths they espouse are self-evident in the organization. And then when you get there, you find out that the behaviors that they actually have in the company have a different set of values attributed to them. And that's really what people follow, is based on the behaviors. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So the first part, and the thing that I think is the most important, is establishing the vision in an organization. So this is a quote from John Carmack. Who here knows who John Carmack is? One person. 2, 3, 4. Okay. So he's probably, so you'll know him from his work. So he was a co-founder of id Software and was the lead developer on Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, Quake. Many of you are in my same age bracket, so you grew up with those and loved them dearly. And now everyone is realizing who he is. So he says that I don't know why there's a timer that's not started. Thank you, Logitech. A strong team can take any crazy vision and turn it into reality. Now, he said crazy vision, not a bad vision or an ill-conceived vision. And to me, that's because a vision creates empowerment. So a good vision will allow a team to be empowered and act on that vision. The first response I usually get to a presentation like this is, but I'm not a leader. And I would say with that attitude, you're right. So you need to know that you are probably leading someone today, whether you know it or not. Especially if you have a more senior title, likely everyone who doesn't have that senior title is following your example. I usually look at how someone uses a tool. So if you have a senior administrator on a tool, everyone else who is not senior on that tool will often try to emulate the person who is the most senior on that tool, which also reinforces bad behaviors sometimes. But you are leading someone. And so that means that you do have power in organizations. And what I've found is that the people who are the closest to the work often have the most power, because you get to translate all the things that come down from higher leadership areas, the more formal leadership models. One of the things you can do if you're not a formal leader is you can give feedback to the more formal leaders or to leaders that are higher up in the organization and have a different context. This is often hard to give harsh, critical feedback. A lot of people fear for their jobs, but in a good organization that has a generative culture, this should be acceptable and invited by teams, by leaders. You can provide a vision for your own area. So this is if you are in charge of a certain tool or set of tools, you may provide a smaller vision just for that area that your team or some others around that team can act on. This vision should be in line with company goals generally, so that it can get funding, but you can also make it in line with goals of others in the team. So I worked at a company called Cerner. It's a large electronic medical record company in the US, and we sell internationally. I don't know if anybody's ever used it, but we have some fairly critical requirements on being able to help our customers, the patients survive. And so there's a lot of criticality there. But we're still very empowered to do what we thought was best to affect change in the organization and improve the lives of the patients. And so one of the things I did was I was running the CI/CD system, and the organization there it's now like 35,000 people or something. And at the time it was 15 to 20,000. So it was a very large organization. It was spread over many different cities and countries. And I took on an initiative I was a year in as a software engineer. So I was not a leader by any means. I just happened to be on a team that had support for all the CI/CD tools and the cloud platform tools for this organization. And I went out and started to work with other people around the company who had a stake in this and align their goals towards this same vision. I was using Docker and Mesos. It was like the first release Mesos ever had that had Docker on it, which is like 0.21 or something. I think Docker was around a year old, but we were seeing a lot of benefits from it. And so we were able to get all of these individuals on board and start to build out this system. And within just a few months, we were proving value and delivering working software of higher quality much faster to customers. We also had another product, a brand new product, that was trying to build features into their system, and they came over. They saw kind of what we were trying to do, and they came over to try to jump on board with this. And some of what we allowed for them was we facilitated their ability to get work done. And they used our cluster of Mesos to build their own product on top of. And so we slowly started to add more nodes to it as that business grew. So a vision should be bold. It should be inspiring. So you need to set something that people want to follow or want to work towards. Ours was we had one of the largest Jenkins installations in the world, and it was constant. The queue was just massive of jobs. Like 30, 40 jobs waiting in the queue to run, and so response time to developers was taking a really long time, and we needed to try to solve that problem. And we wanted to do it with a lot of newer tools that were really the only thing we had available to us. This was an area that I decided to focus on the smaller piece and not go to try to automate all of the VMware stuff because that group was not interested in being a part of that. So we had to use the tools that were available to us. And it should also be actionable. So if people can't take action on a vision, then it's probably not going to be very useful. Part of this vision that we had at Cerner allowed people who weren't even part of the main vision to take action. So that team from another product area was able to come over and work on this shared vision together. And it should also be business focused. So the reason that I was allowed to do any of this work, not only because I was doing almost all of it in my extra time, but it was also because our focus was on delivering value to customers faster at a higher quality, and not on playing around with Mesos and Docker, although that may have been the real reason. But that that should not be how you pitch this to leadership. Just saying. So if you are a leader, then you should spend time creating this vision, and this is even if you're an informal leader. These will take a lot of time, and you need to take time away from work to actually develop this. You can't just try to do it as you're going. So I worked at another company called the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. In the United States, insurance is a state-based system, so we have no federal government organization that helps manage insurance. So we're kind of the cat herders for all of the insurance commissioners. We started like 150 years ago to help plan events for them and create model law. But we also now do all of their IT work. So while we were at the NAIC, we needed to do a full DevOps transformation. We had a lot of old processes. The culture was pretty good, but there was some missing areas that we wanted to enhance. And we spent a week traveling to different companies, and then another week kind of establishing this vision, at least a first draft of it. And we'll discuss kind of how we rolled that out to the rest of the organization over time. I also want to mention this. So I'd mentioned a generative culture earlier, that is a much easier area to be a non-formal leader of these types of things. And this comes from Dr. Ron Westrum. And this is often referred to as the Westrum culture typology. And there's 3 different areas of how organizations process information: pathological, bureaucratic, and generative. It's generally known that pathological and generative organizations are the most successful. If you think of pathological, you might think of Apple during the Steve Jobs days. That was likely a very pathological company, or that's the way they processed information based off the stories. And a generative culture, you might think of a Google, where you don't necessarily identify an individual authoritarian leader or someone who's focused on having their vision fulfilled. And bureaucratic is the least effective, but probably the most common, or at least the most common I see. So a bad vision will lead to bad outcomes. So it's not good to just create a vision. You need to create a vision that is going to be effective. A bad vision will be biased for failure. No vision is also going to be a bad vision. So if you try to do a transformation and you don't tell anyone where you want to go and end up, then likely they will continue to do the same thing that they are doing today. Organizations are heavily biased towards the mean, and they will constantly revert to the mean. Also, an IT-focused vision is not good. It will not be successful. IT type pieces will change a lot, and these types of transformations will take several years. So if your goal is IT-oriented, then that will be less successful than if it's business-focused. If there's a lack of clarity, so visions don't need to be highly detailed. They need to clearly identify what you're trying to head towards. One that I like is JFK's space race, get to the moon vision. It was basically, we're going to get to the moon by the end of the decade. Go do it. There wasn't a lot of detail to how it was going to be done. Certainly JFK was no rocket scientist or anything. And he made sure, though, that people could take action, provided the infrastructure for it, provided the funding, provided the motivation. So we also can't do this alone, so we need to find others who will help us. And I like this quote. It is not about whether you call yourself, maybe it's fine. It is not about, apparently the microphone does not like this quote. It is not about whether you call yourself a leader or not. It is about what you have to show to people as a leader. Leadership is contagious. You carry it and share it. And this is really about everyone is a leader and everyone can show leadership. And one leader is not going to transform a company. Generally, I take the perspective that I should use anyone who is willing to help. There won't be a lot of people generally who are willing to put themselves out there and help the cause. But if someone comes up to you, you should have some work for them to do and spend time figuring out what they might be able to do. I have a strong bias towards informal leaders in this area, so that's kind of what I'm saying about anyone willing to help. So if there's a very junior software engineer or sysadmin who wants to help with this transformation, empower them to do that and to lead in their areas. I find that formal leadership is generally has some sort of a bias in it with people that are leading or following, that there's some authoritarianism there. There's some negative aspect of, this person is in a leadership position, a formal leadership role, and so that's why they get to do these things. So I often, in these situations, try to empower people who are not in formal leadership roles. That also helps serve the point of anyone can be a leader. So you really need to nurture this team, and this team can be made up of all informal leaders, and the person painting the vision can be an informal leader. And this team will be the reason that you're successful. The management team that exists today is not necessarily going to be the reason everyone succeeds. This team needs to have outings together. They need to have a shared understanding of where they're headed, and they need to be able to act on that vision. This team will be the team that gets the negatives and the positives earlier than any other area of the organization. So this team is generally more biased for positive feelings around the change because they're obviously invested in it. However, this team will know when things are not going well, and learning from them and watching them will be really valuable. So at the NAIC, we use this model as well, and we had a lot of people who were informal leaders in their areas, and they were kind of our evangelists for this change, and they were able to kind of help us understand where the messaging was going wrong, how we could change that messaging, and most of them took that empowerment that we were giving them already and started to develop classes for some of their areas so that the people that, say in database or networking wouldn't feel left out and were ready for the change that was coming, because we were doing cloud and DevOps and CI/CD stuff, just about everything at once, which was a little probably too much. But it was very effective having so many different people leading in their own areas and affecting change. And you should also publicly praise these team members to help give them more encouragement and to show other people that these informal leaders are what they could do as well. We want to have the evangelist group promote and produce more evangelists over time. You also want to create shared experiences. So I like this quote for this. Words are symbols for shared memories. If I use a word, then you should have some experience of what the word stands for. If not, the word means nothing to you. So this generally means that we all have some experience with any word. We've heard it before. We've heard it in some context, depending on where you've heard the word. So over my lifespan, I've found out that some of the words I thought I knew the meaning to and never looked up, I was inaccurate as to what the meaning was, because for some reason in my area of where I grew up, that meaning had changed to some extent. And so we all have these different experiences with words. Some of them have really negative connotations, some have positive, and a lot of these are personal perspectives on words. So there are two levels of building shared experiences. And the first is the leadership layer. So this isn't formal leadership, but this is that leadership team who is painting the vision. And I break up the rest of the organization, into a separate area, because I think that they require different modes of acting on this. So leadership is going to be a smaller team. They're going to be focused on creating that vision, making sure that vision is actionable, whether that's finding other people on other teams to help out, which we had to do in the Cerner instance, where we had to get people that were on teams that didn't really care to help facilitate other teams who did want to do this kind of work. And they're both equally important. So leadership teams need landmarks. They need something to look back on, so that they all have the same understanding of the language. Who here thinks that they have a different definition of DevOps than me? All right, there we go, proof. So this is, certainly DevOps is one of the first words. Agile, like all of these words are just horrible words because they mean nothing to an organization or a group of people, but they mean a lot to individuals. And for someone who goes around and talks about a lot of DevOps stuff and runs a DevOps conference, they do mean quite a lot to me, but they probably mean a lot less to other people. I had someone at a company whose name I won't mention said, "I finally understand Agile. It's just waterfall in shorter time periods." Yeah, I couldn't laugh because I was working there, and I left very quickly after. Yeah, pretty much that was this person's interpretation. So it was really disappointing when that kind of statement is made, and that it makes it clear that so when those revelations happen a lot, and they are sometimes encouraging and discouraging at the same time, where you will have someone in a meeting say, "Oh, I finally understand what you're saying." And then you say, "Okay, well, tell me, what do you understand?" And then they tell you, and you realize you've just had a revelation, which means that I'm going to have to try even harder now to explain what I'm trying to get across. So it does take a lot of time, because we're destroying this history of knowledge around these words. But building that shared information model is critical to moving forward, because if you're all talking about these words in a different way, then anyone else in the organization is not going to have any clue as to what those words mean to the organization. These shared experience points are also reference points to look back on. For example, when I was at the NAIC and another company called DST, which is a company that has financial data from all around the world, but they have like 70% of all mutual fund data, but you'd never have heard of them. They're a back end for banks and things. But at both of those companies, we went and toured Google and Amazon, and a bunch of startups with the leadership team. And at DST, I went with the Office of the President, and I was just a manager who had just become a manager from a DevOps engineer earlier that year. So I was essentially a nobody in the company, but I was able to get this thing scheduled and be on the trip with them, with the Office of the President. And that was a really good trip. And we were all able to start understanding where we wanted to go and where what that vision would be that we would paint for the organization. And we were able to begin understanding the terms, and the CEO was beginning to understand what our real data center looked like, and what real utilization looked like inside of that data center. We were a financial processing type system, so almost all of our compute was sitting idle all year for that end of year processing that spiked incredibly high. So most of the time it's just sitting there unused. And I think that was a bit of a revelation to him on that trip. That trip also provided a lot of inspiration. It showed us how things could be. It showed us how strong teams work and get work done. And it provided motivation moving forward. One thing we did not do at DST, but we did at the NAIC, is we repeated these. So we didn't do them just once and that was it. We did them every few months, where we would do some sort of activity to provide kind of another touch point and another reference point to look back on. So at one organization, we did kind of leave everyone behind. And so I learned from that and didn't do that the next time. You can't just go on your little leadership trip or go and do a fun team building exercise with your leadership team and then ignore the fact that the rest of the organization exists. So they also need a shared information model. So at one of these organizations I was at, we went on our leadership trip, we came back, we kind of set the vision of what we were going to do. That message got delivered to the management team, hundreds of managers across the organization. They interpreted it however they wanted, which was mostly in line with what they were already doing. And so we got basically the same thing we had before with a slight improvement, which was not the goal of what we wanted. And ultimately that company has been acquired and not a great acquisition. And so that was, to some extent, on us not being able to spread that message and create a shared understanding across the company. And also a shared understanding of where the company was in this process of, we're going to have to get acquired because the business is not successful anymore. So a shared experience with the organization is also to help motivate them, not just create a shared language for everyone to use, but it's also to provide some motivation. So at NAIC, we actually paid for, I think, 40 or 50 people every year. The organization was in total 600, and the technology folks were about 250. And so we paid for 40 or 50 people to go to AWS reInvent every year, which was fairly expensive. But we thought it was worth it for them to go and experience this together and to come back motivated and ready to try new things, to work differently. And every year, sending these groups to different conferences was really valuable. So leaders should also be leading. So the CTO went to all of these conferences every year with the team. Didn't just sit in an ivory tower or just go on leadership events, but went and actually participated with the teams. We also had a hackathon type event where the CTO was heavily involved, was a judge. I was the chief architect there. I was also a judge. And we were there the whole time. We attended. I don't remember what they call them. Maybe it was a CEO of there were sister companies, and both CEOs were at the event, and both CEOs presented, and so there was a lot of involvement from leadership. And other organizations I've been to, you get a lot of absence from leaders. People that are vice presidents or presidents never show up to events, and that can be damaging. But most importantly, the person leading the vision should be involved in these events with the rest of the organization. So I've already talked about attending conferences. We've also read books together. So I think earlier the DevOps handbook was mentioned. I'm sure the Phoenix Project has been mentioned. There are many books around this area that it's really valuable for everyone in the group to read the same book and have the same reference points. Who here has read the Phoenix Project? Only a few? Okay. You guys know who Brent is, but no one else does, so you should go read the Phoenix Project. You find a lot of times in DevOps communities that a lot of people have read particular books, and then you can kind of talk to people relating back to that book and what was said in the book. I mentioned that you can tour companies that you want to be like. Another way I've found is a great way to build shared experiences, especially across disparate areas of the company. So, I mean, Dell is everywhere. But even RSA is in, I think, 4 states and several countries around the world. So we have people in India, Israel, Australia, UK. I think there's some people in Germany, actually. I mean, they're all over the place. So it's really hard to stay connected and remain a team. And one way to do this is Slack. Who here uses Slack? A few people. There's a bunch of other tools that are similar. So there's who here knows who Etsy is? Or what Etsy is? It's not a who. All right. So John Allspaw was the CTO of Etsy. And while he was there, they introduced a tool that they called Mixer. And that tool used the Active Directory system to pair people up every 2 weeks or a month or something like that. And it was fairly random. So it just took people and paired them up. And then they went and had a coffee or something. So we've done that now at 2 organizations and found a lot of value in it. There's a tool called Donut that integrates with Slack. And being able to first have Slack where there's this shared communication platform, and second, be able to make this, I believe Etsy calls it assisted serendipity. And having this assisted serendipity within the organization to help create connections was really valuable. And it helps to horizontally spread the information between teams. So the next step is that everyone needs to get a little bit more education. What I find in a lot of organizations is that people are very busy with the regular work of keeping a system up and keeping features rolling out, and there's not a lot of time to learn new things or to practice those new things. And so we need to give people the opportunity for this. Benjamin Franklin said, "An investment in knowledge pays the best interest." And many organizations do not prioritize education. It's usually an afterthought. And I think you really need to learn something new to build something new. If you use the same people with the same knowledge to try to create a new system or to dramatically change a system, it's unlikely that you will get anything different. And when I say system here, I'm using it in a context, so this is another word. System is a very vague word. So Dr. Richard Cook wrote a paper about how complex systems fail. I suggest you read it. It's a very interesting paper, and if I didn't tell you what I'm about to tell you, you'd probably think it was a technology system. But in fact, he's describing the human system of nurses and doctors at a hospital. And he goes through all these different failure modes of the system and how those things would reveal themselves in the system. So here when I'm talking about system, I'm talking about system generally. And if you're going to build a new system and you haven't learned anything that's different than that system, you'll probably build the same system. There's something similar around Conway's Law, and if you have a communication structure in your organization, then you will likely build a tool that looks just like that communication system. So knowledge changes outcomes. With that new knowledge, you will get different outcomes. Just by providing education to people, you will get outcomes that are different than if you hadn't provided that information. This is an aspect of how complex systems fail, which is you introducing a change will have unexpected consequences on the system. So you can't predict what will happen. You need to try to give the system the best information possible and then allow the system to make decisions. You need to make education a priority. Building this into goals is a really good thing, or things that are measured by the organization. Most organizations will say, yeah, we really value education. They may make it available, but they don't make it a priority. So they'll say, hey, we have this training site. You should go do this. You have no time to do it, so do it on your own time. And we will monitor your progress on it. But you won't actually get paid anymore if you complete it or don't complete it. You will still get your bonus if you don't complete it, whatever the case is. It is not aligned with the priorities of the individual or the organization. So this is something that usually you need formal leadership to act on. I do it with my direct reports to set clear education goals that say, these, you need to do these things. And usually, so I'm working with a lot of architects generally, and I expect architects not only to learn on their own, but also to teach. And I think that's part of education. Part of what I've learned so much is by trying to present to others. I spend hundreds of hours researching things just to be able to present on different pieces. So I expect architects to present information to other people. And that makes it a clear deliverable and a clear goal in the organization. It also needs to be monitored. So I'd said that some of these tools that are available for like I think Code Academy, there's a few other ones, they actually provide dashboards for organizations. And you need to monitor that people are learning and that they're taking action, and you need to reward that. So everyone also learns differently. Even so, the NAIC had a great culture when I got there, and they had a great leadership team, and we still went around and around about how, what is the best thing to provide to people. There's online training, so we could just do all online training, and I'm biased towards not having in-person training, but so I was maybe part of the problem of this too. But I was like, just provide online training, and I was told, that's probably not the right way to do this. We need to provide all different kinds of forms of training. So some people do learn better with in-person classes. Also, in-person classes dedicate someone to the training during the day. It's usually set aside that, this day or these few days are dedicated to this training. I also use newsletters. These are not read as often, but I try to accumulate in newsletters and send them out every couple of weeks to say, this is kind of what we want to focus on, and this is what you should be learning if you want to be leading in this organization moving forward. And then attending conferences. That's a great learning opportunity and a great way to meet people and learn how they're doing things in other organizations. And we also do hackathons, which is a great way of learning very quickly and putting that into practice. And we just had one a few weeks ago at RSA. And a few of those items are things that we'll be putting into production systems. There were great features that came out of it. You also need to get feedback. So one issue that I think a lot of people run into is that, and one issue that I've run into in my own practice of this, is not getting feedback early enough, not getting the right feedback, and assuming that you're doing the right thing. So I like Daniel Kahneman's quote on this. True intuitive expertise is learned from prolonged experience with good feedback on mistakes. So I like his use of intuitive expertise. So that's what we're trying to build into the organization, is an intuitive expertise of how the culture should act and the behaviors that are expected in that culture. So you need to measure what matters. Who here has read the book Accelerate by Dr. Nicole Forsgren? You guys will have to reference a whole bunch of German books that I've also never read. So Dr. Nicole Forsgren, who's heard of the annual State of DevOps report? There's a big DevOps survey that goes out every year. Puppet used to do it, and now it's Google, because Google bought the company that Dr. Forsgren started. Anyway, so Puppet used to do it, now Google does it. I think it's open right now, so go fill it out. It's State of DevOps survey or something like that. Just Google that. She identifies 4 key metrics to measure. And this is to measure our overall success. So even though we're focused on mostly a cultural transformation, although this transformation can take place in CI/CD systems or monitoring, we want to be able to measure the whole system and its output. And the Accelerate book and the State of DevOps report is very focused on business value and measuring business value. So they also correlate this to stock price. And they find that these 4 metrics, delivery lead time, which is your time from the commit to successfully running in production. They decided not to do anything before the commit into the source code system because it's so variable. Every organization is very different in what they consider the start of an idea. The second is deployment frequency. That is a proxy for batch size, and that is the deployment is to production or an app store or something that is going to a customer. And the third one is mean time to recovery, which is a fairly common one. And then the fourth is change failure rate, and the change failure rate is a proxy for quality. So they couldn't identify any other quality metric that was reasonable. Everyone probably agrees that percentage-based metrics on testing are not usually very helpful, and they're easily gamed. So those were the 4 metrics, and those were the 4 metrics that showed those organizations are producing a lot of business value. So starting to collect those metrics before one of these changes and throughout the change and after you think you're done is really helpful to getting solid information back, highly quantifiable information so that you can see, are you negatively affecting the overall system? Although you may be doing what you want to do, it may not be creating a system that is more productive or more efficient for your customers. And ultimately, that's what pays you, so you should probably optimize for that. So the Western Culture Survey, which I mentioned earlier, is another way we measure. So I've done that at several organizations. I usually do that for my own team, especially in high change environments. If we're in a very fast-paced transformation, I will even do this every week. It's like 5 or 6 questions. I think it's 6 questions, and it is a Likert scale, so it's just from strongly disagree to strongly agree, and people just go through and take it really fast. And that gives me very quick feedback to, are things that we are doing, are those negatively impacting the culture of the team, or are they positively impacting the culture of the team? And if there's a series of bad results coming out of it, what do I need to do to change this environment? And you can also do user surveys. So the users of a transformation are employees, and you should survey them to see if they like what is happening. You'll also often get high attrition rates in these types of transformations, and so you want to be able to identify some of this. You can also do one-on-one feedback. At the NAIC, the CTO met with everyone one-on-one, and then met with small groups of people every quarter. And so it was constantly getting a lot of feedback, very direct, rather than trying to do it in some sort of a survey or bubbling up through management chains. And there's a company called Culture Amp who helped us at the NAIC, and they were really valuable in being able to bring this information back, aggregate it up, and present it back out to the organization. And here are some references. I'll publish this on my website shortly after this, so you can go click on them. If you have a Google Pixel, then you can probably just click on them in the photo, which is awesome. If you need to see that, then I'm happy to show you, because Google stuff is awesome. And then there's some contact information. That's my website, and then rsa.com. And that is where the presentation will be posted on danbarker.codes probably within the next day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We will also collect the slides and publish them in the OSDC archive later. So, how about questions before we're leaving for lunch? Everyone still awake?
Anybody have questions? I don't know if lunch is ready yet.
Yeah, I've seen it on Twitter. It is ready.
Oh, okay, it's ready.
Sorry
then
about
anybody
that.
can come up and ask me later.
Yeah, I have to confess I have no questions either, so thanks
Cool.
for the talk. And now let's have lunch.
Awesome, thank you. Enjoy lunch.